So we're up to verse 19 of the 37 practices of bodhisattvas. So I'll first read it. Though you become famous and many bow to you, and you gain riches equal to Vaishravanas, see that worldly fortune is without essence and be unconceited. This is the practice of bodhisattvas. So the previous 7 verses all dealt with various bad experiences, difficulties, adverse circumstances, being abused by others, mistreated, being destitute, sick, and so forth. So they were along the theme of transforming adverse circumstances into the path. So a bodhisattva would use these bad situations in the path to progress along the path, become closer to enlightenment, benefit others, and so on. So now we have a switch. So this is talking about good things, being wealthy, famous, honored by many people. So these are the kind of experiences that probably most people in the world would like to have. Most people aspire to be rich and famous. But for those of us who are following the Buddhist path, we're not supposed to want these things, right? Not supposed to be concerned with fame and wealth and so forth. But we need to be careful, because it's easy to think, oh, I'm not interested in being rich and famous. As long as we don't have those things, as long as you don't have much money, it's easy to think I'm not interested in money. But we have to be careful, not become complacent about that, because we probably all have within our minds the seeds and the imprints of past attachments. And so if we were to find ourselves in such a situation, being rich and famous, it's possible that those seeds could be triggered off, those imprints could be triggered off, and we might become corrupted. So I remember many years ago hearing about this televangelist. Do they still exist? Are there still people who do that? Yeah. Anyway, this guy, apparently he was very popular. He had millions of followers and lots of money because, they go on TV and they say, send me money, send me money. So lots of people were sending him money. So he became very rich and famous. And then something happened. He was found guilty of tax evasion or fraud or something to do with money. And there was a big scandal about that, and he went on trial and so on. So I was reading an article about him, and a friend of his, somebody who'd known him for a long time, said, in the beginning, he loved people and used money, but in the end, he loved money and used people. Yeah, so it shows that it's possible for the mind to change when we find ourselves in such good situations. And we've had a number of cases in recent years of scandals in the Buddhist world. Teachers who have, become very popular and famous and rich and had lots of disciples, and then, misused their situation, abused students, abused money, and so on. So we shouldn't think, oh, that would never happen to me. Yeah, it's possible. It could happen. So we do need to be careful. And we also might think, well, it'll never happen that I'll become rich and famous. But who knows? You might become a teacher, if you gain more knowledge, more experience in the Dharma. You might become a teacher, and then you start getting invited here and there to teach here and there and speak in conferences and so on. So you could become a little bit famous. Or maybe somebody makes a film about Sravasti Abbey, and it's shown on TV, on movie theaters, and suddenly, lots of people all over the world know about Sravasti Abbey and about all the residents. And then, everybody gets kind of famous, and you have thousands of people coming here to look at this place. So you never know, right? These things could happen. And then with money, a rich relative might pass away and leave you big chunk of money or house or car, and suddenly you find yourself with all this money that you never had before. So these things can happen. So we do need to be aware of the dangers of getting attached to these things and even becoming corrupted, and be wary of that. So what to do? So the verse has two points of advice. One is, see that worldly fortune is without essence. So I was thinking about that when I was living in Singapore, I got to know a number of people who were very wealthy. Probably some of them were millionaires. And we didn't talk about money, but anyway, you look at the house they have. Big, beautiful house in the most expensive part of the city, and big cars and Mercedes and BMWs, even chauffeurs to drive them around and run errands for them and so on. So it's obvious they got a lot of money. And most people would probably look at them and think, wow, they got a great life. Wouldn't that be great if I could live like that? But then you get to know these people and talk to them and listen to them, and you find out that they have the same problems everybody else has. Sickness, physical sickness, they get cancer, heart disease, strokes, just like everybody else. And mental illness, family members who are suffering from mental illness. One man that I knew, he was a very successful architect. His specialty was airports. And so I think he had tons of money. And he had a son in his 30s who committed suicide. Just devastating, just horrible. And another man who was very, very wealthy, a successful businessman, he had 2 children. One, a girl who was about 13, she was mentally ill. She tried to commit suicide a couple of times, but wasn't successful, fortunately. But she would cut herself up with a razor blade. His other child had Down syndrome. So if you think about it, if that kind of thing happens in your life, and you got $1 million in the bank, or even $1 billion in the bank, is that going to take away your suffering? Is that going to make you happy? No. So I think if you think about that kind of thing, worldly fame and wealth and so forth, it can't even relieve our temporal problems, everyday problems of this life, much less eliminate the root of suffering, and be able to eliminate the karma, the afflictions that keep us in samsara again and again, life after life. So there's lots of meditations in Buddhism that can help us recognize, that wealth just doesn't make it. Also, a couple of years ago, I was in a meeting of business people who were interested in mindfulness, bringing mindfulness and compassion into corporations. And at lunch one day, one of these guys said, in the past, people wouldn't reach the top until they were in their 50s or 60s. But nowadays, there's people who are getting there in their 20s and 30s. They reach their goals. They're millionaires or whatever, very, very successful. And they find themselves there, and they realize it's not what they thought it would be. And they're still feeling empty and unfulfilled. Yeah, so that was another kind of illustration about how worldly success and wealth is without essence. And then, of course, impermanence, we can't take it with us. Buddhism says in our past lives, we've all been millionaires and billionaires. We've had tons of wealth. We've been rajas and emperors and all those kind of things. But we left it all behind. When we die, we leave it all behind. We can't take it with us, and we're still circling in samsara. So these are some points that can help us, not be attached to such wealth. But on the other hand, it's good to have wealth, because then you can share it with others. You can use your wealth to practice generosity, as Venerable was talking about yesterday, benefit a lot of other people, benefit the Dharma, and so on. And then the second point he mentions is to be unconceited. So this is another danger, that you become proud, arrogant, conceited about your fame and your wealth and so on. And for me, one of the best antidotes to that is to just reflect on the kindness of others who helped you get to where you are. Starting with your parents who gave you this life, this body, and all the people who gave you food, and all the teachers who taught you what you know, and so on. So your status was not totally your own work, your own doing, but dependent on so many other people. And so contemplating that can really help you to avoid pride and have humility, and then also have compassion and kindness. So if we do find ourselves in these kind of situations, we have to be aware of the dangers and avoid those, but also recognize there are things we can do with such a situation to make it, turn it into the path. Okay, so Bodhisattva would transform this kind of situation into the path to further their own spiritual development and benefit others. Okay, thank you.